Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to see some familiar names logged on here and some new ones too. My name is Izzy Ruta, and I'm the Adult Services Library Technician here at Lewiston Public Library. And you are here for our program, Take Me to the Moon, a virtual evening with NASA. Whether you are watching on Zoom or on Facebook, you are welcome to interact with us during the program. For Zoom, you'll want to use the chat feature, and for Facebook, you'll want to comment directly on the live stream. And so with that out of the way, I'll introduce our presenter for tonight. We have Patricia Moore here with us from NASA. Patricia is the communication strategist and museum liaison for NASA's Artemis communications team. She travels the country integrating human exploration resources at museums, science centers, planetariums, and libraries. Her work providing authentic NASA experiences to community partners like us here at LPL helps us to inspire the next generation of explorers. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Patricia. Welcome.
Welcome. Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to hang out with all of you this evening and talk about NASA's return to the moon with the Artemis program. So to kick things off, I always like to show an inspirational video to get us in the mood and get us excited about our missions. And so let's get going.
50 years ago, we went to the moon. We called it Apollo.
What many people don't know is that Apollo had a twin.
She was a woman named Artemis,
goddess of the moon.
We are returning to the moon
as a new generation of explorers.
This time to stay.
And to prepare to achieve humanity's next giant leap of sending the first human missions to Mars.
We believe our course will redefine what is possible.
That we would discover life-saving,
earth-changing science.
And that the challenges ahead will inspire generations.
This is our manifest.
For all who wondered if we could return.
For all who dreamed of pressing beyond.
This is your calling.
We go for all of America.
We go.
We go as the Artemis generation.
We go.
And all of you are a part of our Artemis generation. So I want to tell you a few fun things about me and what I do at NASA. My role is primarily to share NASA's story and all of our missions with the public. It's part of NASA's charter that we share all of our missions, our science, the exploration, and all the work that we do with the public. And so we have a really great communication and public engagement team. And we do that either by going out to conferences and working with teachers, libraries, museums, web, social media. So there's lots of ways to share NASA's story. And so I primarily work with libraries, museums, and science centers. And I miss getting out and seeing people and being in environments like the pictures that you see here. But doing things virtually is also great because we get to reach audiences that we may not have had the chance to reach before. So I'm glad to be with you tonight to talk about Artemis. So for those of you who may not know much about Artemis, the general gist of it is that Artemis is NASA's new human exploration program where we will send the first woman, the next man, as well as the first person of color to the moon in just a few years. And Artemis is the twin sister of Apollo in Greek mythology. So it really is the perfect name for our new program headed back to the moon. And this time when we go, we're going to stay. So one of the main differences between Apollo and Artemis is that we are planning to have a long-term presence on the moon. And we want a sustainable plan so that it's just not a few missions to prove that we can do it. It's missions that will help us understand what it's like to live on another world so that we can then prepare for human missions to Mars. Please excuse my dogs if you hear them bark. So there's lots of reasons to return to the moon. And so I'll touch on a few of the science pieces. So during the Apollo missions, we landed our missions around the equator. Now we're headed to the South Pole, and the South Pole is of great interest because there is millions of pounds of water ice, whether it be along the surface or underneath of the surface. We know that it's there, and this is a great resource that we can utilize for human missions. It also gives us a platform to understand the solar system better. We can study the sun understand the moon, since we're traveling to a different area of the moon, the impact of our, and the impact of the moon-Earth relationship. And so there's just a lot of great scientific objectives that our science team at NASA is excited to discover. In addition to that, we're very much interested in the operations side. And so operations is all about living and working on the moon. So we need to test out our spacesuits and our landers and our rovers and learn how to extract the water from these deep craters and turn it into a resource that's usable, water, oxygen, or even liquid oxygen for a fuel source. So these are all things we want to explore and test. Now, the South Pole, like I said, is of interest because we know that there's water there, and that water is in the permanently shadowed regions of the South Pole. So in the center here, this is Shackleton Crater, and this area is definitely of interest to NASA. We don't know where we'll land first, but it will be somewhere most likely in this video right here. And one of the key things to note that makes the South Pole a great place to visit is that the water is here in these permanently shadowed regions, but then along the rims of the crater, it's almost in constant sunlight. So we need to set up a base and have a site for operations that's in sunlight, because we're going to rely on sunlight not only to see, but for power as well. And then we want to be close enough to these craters so that we can send our robots down there to extract samples and bring back up to our home base, or our Artemis base, as we're calling it. So South Pole kind of has everything that we want for our next round of missions. Now, I always get a question about the different rockets and spacecrafts that we have, and why can't we use what we have right now to get to the moon? And so I always start by explaining kind of the engineering and the mission design when it comes to deep space travel. So all of our spacecrafts and rockets that are in existence today that we use to go to the International Space Station are specifically designed to go to low Earth orbit. So that's 8.5 minutes to get to orbit, takes a few hours to get to the space station, maybe a few days, depending on how we launched and how long it takes to catch up to it. You are traveling at about 17,500 miles an hour, and we have heat shields that can withstand those temperatures and spacecraft that can withstand those speeds. And we've got quite a few choices. We have vehicles that are rated for humans, which means they are designed to carry humans. And then we have those that are designed for cargo or satellites, robots, those sorts of things. It's not the same. Not every rocket can carry humans. Now, when we go to the moon and even onto Mars, you have to look at different types of rockets and spacecrafts that are designed to leave Earth orbit, to leave the protection of the magnetosphere around our planet, and go farther beyond. And so you're looking at days, even up to months and years when you're talking about Mars. Your reentry speed is much faster, so you have to have a more robust spacecraft and a more powerful heat shield. And then your spacecraft is going to have the things that are needed for missions that take weeks and eventually, months and years. So the existing spacecrafts that we have right now, and even the rockets that we use, cannot get us to the moon and Mars. So we have to create something new. And that's what NASA's been doing for the last several years. And the Orion spacecraft is going to be the spacecraft that ferries astronauts from Earth to lunar orbit, to the moon's orbit, not to the surface of the moon. That requires a different kind of vehicle, but Orion will get us from Earth to the moon. And astronauts will ride inside, just like we did during Apollo. It's about 30% larger than the spacecraft, the Apollo spacecrafts. It's designed for 4 astronauts instead of 3, and our astronauts can be a variety of heights, as short as 4'10", all the way up to like 6'4", 6'5". So we don't really have size or height limitations like we did during the Apollo days. Our service module, which is the back end of the Orion spacecraft, is built by the European Space Agency. So they're our first partner in our Artemis missions. And then we have a launch escape system, or a launch abort system, on the top, which will pull the Orion away from the larger rocket stack if there's an emergency. So if we know that there's something wrong with the rocket, or the rocket's computer system recognizes a serious issue, it will automatically fire and pull the Orion spacecraft away from the rest of the rocket during launch to protect them. So Orion is designed to keep astronauts in orbit and orbit around the moon for up to about 3 weeks. And so after that, That's a little bit too long to be in such a small spacecraft, but it will have a small exercise kind of rowing machine. It'll have a toilet, which we didn't have during Apollo. They had to use bags when they went to the bathroom. And so it's way more modern, way more sophisticated, and it's going to be the safest space vehicle that we've ever built. So here's a look at it now. It's finished. Many folks didn't realize that we're already done building our first vehicles, and they're sitting at Kennedy Space Center right now. And our team at Kennedy Space Center just finished adding the launch abort system to the top of the Orion spacecraft and service module. And soon we will be stacking it on top of the launch, the Space Launch System. I'm going to get some water real quick. So the Space Launch System is our new rocket that will take astronauts and supplies, cargo, habitats, all sorts of things that we're going to need for future missions. And it is going to be the most powerful rocket ever built, even more powerful than the Saturn V rocket. And it's evolvable, which means it's designed to grow with our mission needs. So in this picture here, you can kind of see a size comparison to the Space Shuttle, which we're familiar with, and of course, the Statue of Liberty. This first rocket, Artemis I, is going to be about 322 feet tall. It'll have 8.8 million pounds of thrust. So it's more powerful than the Saturn V. And then when we're ready to launch bigger things to the moon, like full-sized, landers, full-sized habitats, we can use the larger version, which will have a bigger exploration upper stage. So it has a larger upper stage, but the rest of the rocket is the same. So the Space Launch System rocket for the first Artemis mission is already finished. All of the hardware is at Kennedy Space Center. The last piece that arrived was the core stage, or the orange tank, in April. And we are stacking it inside of that big building that you just saw, the vehicle assembly building. The boosters are stacked. The core stage is stacked. They have the adapter is stacked. The intercryogenic propulsion stage, which is this a small rocket that fires once Orion is in orbit to push it away from Earth. So all of these things are stacked, and soon we will add Orion to the top. And we're all working towards a launch later this year. So as we're stacking the rocket, we are building it on top of something called the mobile launcher. And the mobile launcher is the platform or structure you see here on the ground, on the road. And we do that. So that's the way we get that's our truck, that drives the rocket out to the launch pad. And when it drives the rocket out there, it's traveling at about 1 mile an hour. So it takes a while to get there, but it's moving with the rocket vertically upright. So it has to go pretty slow. So you don't have to worry about the rocket teetering, of course, falling off. And we're able to reuse that mobile launch platform, because once the rocket launches, we can drive it back and reuse it for our next mission. And then once the Artemis I mission and all of our Artemis missions are finished, Orion splashes down in the Pacific Ocean, just like we did during the Apollo days. So Artemis I's coming up, and hopefully we're working towards a launch at the end of this year. Don't have an exact launch date yet, but we will probably know something within the next 6 weeks or so, a closer maybe target area within the end of the year. But it's going to be really exciting, launching the most powerful rocket ever, testing our rocket and our spacecraft with our first Artemis mission. So to give you a little bit more info about Artemis I and about our future missions, let's take a look at this video.
3, 2, 1, 0. Mission liftoff.
Artemis I will lift off from Launch Pad 39B at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida with 8.8 million pounds of thrust, provided by the most powerful rocket in the world, our Space Launch System rocket, or SLS. The uncrewed flight will be the first integrated test of SLS, our new Orion spacecraft, and exploration ground systems at Kennedy. Artemis I will send Orion beyond the moon, 280,000 miles from Earth, farther than any human spacecraft has ever flown.
This is not NASA doing this. This is the United States of America doing this program, the Artemis program, and there are companies all across our country that have a part in it, so there is kind of this wave of excitement being generated just by saying, we're going back to the moon.
After the upper stage of the rocket separates from Orion, the upper stage will deploy small satellites over several days to perform science experiments and technology demonstrations. Orion will make its multi-day outbound trip to the moon, propelled by a service module provided by the European Space Agency. Engineers will test Orion's systems on the way to the moon, Then, Orion will fly about 60 miles above the lunar surface, using the moon's gravity and engines on the surface module to enter a lunar orbit. After about a month and a total distance of over 1 million miles, Orion will return home, faster and hotter than any spacecraft has before. A primary goal of Artemis I, ensure Orion safely returns to Earth before we fly with humans. When we do, we'll build our capability for sustainable lunar exploration, preparing us for missions farther into the solar system.
Initially, what we'd like to do is start establishing a presence on the moon. So we're going to establish going back there on a regular basis, and then we'll end up setting up Gateway, and we would launch to the Gateway, and from Gateway, land on the surface of the moon.
We are there for, weeks, months on end. And there, we're going to be able to test out all the hardware and the habitats and the hatches and the suits and the rovers that'll allow us to prove out those technologies. The moon will lead the way to Mars, and we should be there within the next couple of decades.
All right, so it's happening. In just a few months, we'll launch Artemis I, and then about a year and a half later, we'll have our first crewed mission with Artemis II. And so Artemis II will have 4 astronauts fly on the Space Launch System rocket within the Orion spacecraft. They'll go to the moon, orbit the moon, and then come back. And this will be the first time we've had astronauts on the rocket and inside of the Orion spacecraft while performing missions and tasks in space. So once that mission is successful and completed, we'll be working towards our first lunar surface mission, which will be Artemis III. And this is where we'll land the first woman and the first person of color on the moon, which is really exciting. So let's take a look at our Artemis team. We have a pretty diverse and amazing group of astronauts and engineers and scientists that are working on these missions. So I'd like to introduce you to them.
At NASA, we have always answered the innate call to go.
With Artemis,
we are going to stay.
Proving that humanity
can live on the moon,
Mars,
and other worlds,
and share the wonders of the solar system with all.
Our story is one of people.
all those who make this journey possible.
From advocates across communities,
to companies across industries,
to countries around the world,
we achieve this collective endeavor.
Our efforts create impact for all.
Technologies that revolutionize industries.
And jobs that bring prosperity to people.
The discoveries from space
benefit the way we live on Earth today.
And those from the moon
will create a better future
for generations to come.
But to do that,
we must go.
Hi, I'm Chell Lindgren.
My name is Raja Chari.
Kayla Barron.
Kate Rubens.
Hi, I'm Christina Cook.
NASA astronaut Joe Akaba.
Jessica Meir.
Woody Hoberg.
Ann McLean.
Stephanie Wilson.
My name is Johnny Kim.
Nicole Mann.
Victor Glover.
Jessica Watkins.
Hi, I'm Matthew Dominic.
Jasmine Mogbelli.
Frank Rubio.
Scott Tingle.
This is what we do. This is what we will do.
Let's go.
We go to the moon to learn how to live on other planets.
For the benefit of all.
All right. So there's a look at our team of Artemis astronauts, and these individuals have really diverse backgrounds. Some of them are scientists, geologists, planetary scientists. We have medical doctors. We have folks that have flown in the military, test pilots. We have different kinds of engineers, mechanical, aerospace engineers. So we really have a vast variety of talents which are going to be needed for these missions to the moon and Mars. All right, so when we get to the surface of the moon, we have a lot of great things that we hope to accomplish on that first Artemis III mission. It will be our first time to land astronauts on the surface with a new human landing system. And NASA is working with industry or commercial partners to build a lander. We'll have one company that will build the first lander for those first missions. And then we will have other companies in the future, help provide landing systems for our astronauts. So NASA is doing things a little different. We used to, as the government, say, these are the requirements, build us this, and we would give the money to a company for as a contract. And now instead we're saying, okay, how would you do it? What are your best ideas? You know, how would you build the landing systems? Here's our parameters. These are the objectives and things that we require, but we leave a lot of the ingenuity up to these companies. And so that's what we're doing, not only with our landers, but also we're going to start doing something similar with our spacesuits as well. Now, an important piece that was mentioned in the video earlier is the gateway. And to truly have a sustainable presence, a long-term presence in and around the moon, we need an outpost. And that's what Gateway is. It's going to be a very small space station. It's more like a spaceship, not really a space station. It has a small habitat. It's got connecting ports and docking systems for the lunar landing system for humans, also the Orion spacecraft. It's got a power and propulsion element. And astronauts will be able to fly to the gateway inside of Orion, get out, prep for the next part of their mission, get inside the landing system, and then go to the surface. And so we'll see launches of gateway pieces going to the moon in just a couple of years. And we will grow the gateway with our international partners. So NASA is contributing the first 3 pieces of the gateway, and then the Canadian Space Agency is going to contribute a robotic arm, and the Japanese and aerospace agencies are looking to build an international laboratory, a science laboratory that could do science in orbit around the moon. And so our end goal, of course, is to get to the point where we have what we call an Artemis base camp. So we've got landing systems, we have spacesuits, we have ISRU, which stands for in situ resource utilization, learning how to live off the land, you know, extracting the minerals that we might need, figuring out if we can take the lunar dirt, or we call it regolith, turn it into a 3D printing material, possibly extracting water, turning that into a resource that's usable. We've got different rovers that we're building right now. One would be like an all-terrain type vehicle that the astronauts would wear their spacesuits in. The other would be more like an RV where they can be comfortable and go farther out away from the base camp in a pressurized rover, so that they can sleep, you know, and be away for a few days. So there's so much that needs to be done, and NASA can't do it alone. So we've got really great commercial partners, as well as countries that, in addition to the ones I just mentioned, we have Brazil and United Arab Emirates, New Zealand, South Korea, just to name a few. And there's a few new, Australia, there's a few new ones that have just came on in the last month or so. So it's truly going to be an international effort. And all of this is helping us get to Mars. We're not ready to go right now. There's so much to learn. We've never had humans live on another world before. And before we send our astronauts millions of miles away from home, we should test all of our capabilities closer to home on the moon. And so even though we're not sending humans anytime in the next 10, probably 15 years, or probably more like 20 years or so from now, we are going to continue to send robots, because robots are telling us things about Mars. They're doing science and preparing us and teaching us things so that we know the right type of equipment and technology that we need to bring with us when we send humans. And we'll even continue to use robotic explorers on the moons, because there are some things that just aren't safe for our astronauts to do that robots can do much easier with less risk. And maybe one of you watching this evening, if you are in the elementary, middle school, or even high school age, you could potentially be one of these astronauts that goes to Mars. And Artemis is going to help us get there. And so if you are interested in being a part of NASA and maybe being one of those astronauts that travel to Mars one day, this is what your view would be like at night. You look up at the night sky, you're over 39 million miles away from home at its closest point between Earth and Mars, and Earth is a tiny blue speck in the night sky. It just really puts in perspective how difficult and challenging missions to Mars will be, and why Artemis and learning how to live on the moon is really going to help us make these missions successful. So if you want to be a part of the NASA team or just the space industry team, there are so many jobs and career opportunities. We have NASA civil servant government employees, and then we have lots and lots of companies that are contractors of NASA. Great experiences to come in as an intern in college, and it gives you a chance to work alongside folks at NASA or at our industry companies like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, and Aerojet Rocketdyne, SpaceX. I mean, Northrop Grumman, there are so many that we work with. We have jobs that require skilled technicians, which are the folks that work with their hands to build the stuff, right, to build the hardware. We have avionics technicians that focus on software and the guts of the spacecraft, all the wiring and cabling. Food scientists that are developing space food that has a long shelf life for missions to the moon and Mars. Flight controllers that run mission control and problem solve issues during the mission. Folks that are building our launch pads and getting our Florida launch, our launch capabilities ready to go. Robotic engineers, we have geologists and scientists, folks that study radiation. We have medical doctors, graphic designers and artists. All those videos and pictures that I showed you, someone made those. And that's what a lot of the folks on my team, they create the beautiful pictures and videos that help tell our story. So many different opportunities to be involved. And it truly is what we call a team sport, because it takes all sorts of folks with different talents and backgrounds to make these missions possible. All right, so with that, I am happy to answer any questions you have about Artemis or just NASA and space in general. All right. Should I go to the chat, start there? All right, I'll start there. All right, let's see what we've got. Welcome. All right, so Tracy says, I love that the rockets are named after the Greek god and goddesses. How do you come up with the names for the rockets and the spacecrafts? So that's a great question. And sometimes our satellites or our spacecrafts may be named after individuals. So you have like Hubble and James Webb telescopes, and some of our other types of scientific instruments and missions can be named after our famous scientists that led efforts in exploration. But we do like to focus in on and zero in on Greek mythology. Is a really popular area. So, you know, we have like Mercury, Gemini, Apollo, and we have Artemis. And so Greek mythology is a popular way of handling things and picking names. And then sometimes our rockets are pretty, you know, pretty common. You know, like companies will come up with like the Delta, or you have Falcon Space Launch System. And so it'll start with our engineering team and our mission management team, and then it goes through a process within NASA. And if the powers that be at the top like the name, then we stick with it. And in some cases we do contests, naming contests, like we did with the Perseverance rover and some of the other Mars programs too. So it kind of goes, you know, different ways. All right, Eddie would like to know, what kinds of things should I study now to become an astronaut? And you're in kindergarten. Oh, wow. So if you're in kindergarten right now, the best thing you should focus on is just having lots of fun at school and being curious and doing a fun science camps and programs, whether that it's at a museum or science center or a library. Those are all fun and exciting things to do right now when you're in kindergarten. But as you get older and you have a choice in your classes, so in elementary school, you don't really get a lot of choice in the classes that you have to take. But when you get into middle school and high school, you can choose science and math classes that are more advanced. And that's a good thing to do. If your school offers a robotics club or an astronaut club or astronomy club, those are great to get into. And then keep with your science, advanced science courses in high school. And then in college, you have a couple of different ways you could go. We have engineering backgrounds. We have scientists and medical doctor backgrounds in our astronauts, astronauts that have come from the military that are test pilots. So really you have to figure out, what is it that you like? What do you love? What are you passionate about? What area of science and math are you really good at and that you enjoy doing every day? And then you make a career out of that and then apply to be an astronaut over and over and over again, and hopefully you'll be selected. Great question. All right, so Catherine, oh, this is from Facebook. Facebook says, how has water been found on the moon and Mars yet? So because of satellite imagery and technology, we know that there is water ice on the moon. It's going to be mixed in, of course, with all of that lunar regolith, which is crushed up volcanic rock, mostly igneous rock. So it's going to be dirty and messy, but we do know that it's there. Liquid water, no, we have not found any liquid water on the moon. Mars, we also know that there's water ice on Mars because of satellite technology, but there's more carbon dioxide ice than water ice. So we've never got our hands on it, right? We've never had people touch water ice on the moon, or we've never even sent a person to Mars. And so that's really the next step, is to get people there, get our hands on it, and have an expert, have our geologists and our scientists there, our astronauts there, look at it and see what we can make of it. And it can be a resource that's usable. Great question. Another Facebook question: how many days does it take to get to Mars from the moon? Is the initial trip just to go and come back, or not to stay? Those are two great questions. So the moon is a couple of days away from Earth. It takes about 3 to 4 days to get there. And then from there, you're looking at probably on average about 9 months to get to Mars from the moon. Okay. Some of the quickest trips our robot explorers have done have been between 6 and 7 months, and the timing would have to be just right to make that happen. But more likely on average, you're looking at an 8 to 9 month mission there and an 8 to 9 month mission back if we time it just right. Now, once we're there on Mars, we haven't decided what that mission profile will look like, which means, are we going to stay a few days? Are we going to stay a few weeks? Are we just going to orbit Mars first? Are we going to go to Phobos and Deimos, the moons of Mars first? Eventually, of course, we know we want to get to the surface, but we haven't decided how long that will be. It could be a few days, a few weeks, months, or even a year. There's different options, and it all has to do with the timing and the distance between the Earth and Mars, because we have to time things just right to make our return home as quick as possible, because you don't want our astronauts being in space longer than necessary. Longer radiation exposure, your body is weightless, your muscles get weak, and there's a lot of other health concerns. And so the shorter we can make that trip, the better. All right, so what is the difference between water ice and carbon dioxide ice, right? So think of carbon dioxide, or CO2, think of it that way. Even like the carbonation, another example, like carbonation that you put in your sodas, that's carbonated water. And so there's oxygen in it, but there's also carbon. And so being able to take that carbon dioxide ice and turn it into, separate the oxygen and the hydrogen and the carbon dioxide and all of that, that's really complicated. And it's, we can do it here on Earth, but can we do it on another planet like Mars? That's kind of the challenge. And that's what we want to try on Moon. We know that ice is going to be pretty messy, right? And so can we get it to a point that it's a usable resource? All right, how long will the astronauts stay on the moon before they go home, or other astronauts come up to take their place? That's another great question. So our first missions to the moon will be about a week. So that Artemis III first mission to the surface, first woman, first person of color, you're looking at about a 6-day mission. And that's longer than we did on any of the Apollo missions. I think the longest they did was maybe 3 or 4 days. And so we're going to stay there for about a week. And then the next mission will stay maybe 2 weeks. And then the next mission maybe we'll stay a month. So each time we go, we'll stay a little bit longer each mission, until we start bringing more and more supplies and habitats and rovers. With each mission, we're going to bring new pieces to add to our base, until we get to a point where we have what we need for a year-long mission. And I hear a lot of our mission planners talk about a year checkout mission, which means we have astronauts living on the moon, the same astronauts living on the moon for an entire year. And when we can do that successfully, then we know that our missions to Mars are closer than they are right now, right? We'll be closer to sending humans to Mars if we know we can keep astronauts safe and secure on the surface of the moon for a year. It's going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to require lots of partnerships, international partnerships, to go to Mars. And so there's a lot to be done between now and then. Let's see. Didn't the news already cover the first woman going up to the moon? Was that a different rocket, or that is yet to happen? So that has not happened. We have not ever had a woman on the moon. The last person to set foot on the moon was Gene Cernan, and that was in 1972. So no other country besides the United States has ever had astronauts to the moon. Now, of course, that won't be the case forever. We'll have Canadians and Europeans and Japanese and other astronauts within our core Artemis team. But then, of course, we have the Russians and the Chinese that are working together on moon missions as well. So the United States won't be the only one traveling to the moon. You were probably thinking of recently on the Virgin Galactic flight, maybe, I think it was Virgin Galactic. They flew one of the astronauts, the female astronauts that were could have potentially gone into space during the 60s and 70s. I can't remember her name, but it was just like there were the Mercury 7 astronauts, the 7 men chosen. There was also a team of women astronauts that were selected, and they trained alongside, or not really alongside, but they trained just like the men did separately. But NASA never flew any of the women in the Mercury, Gemini, or Apollo missions. And so I think it was either Virgin Galactic or Blue Origin took one of those women that trained to be an astronaut early on one of their space tourism flights. Great question. Let's see. All right. How many humans have been on the moon so far? Great question. So there have been 12 astronauts on the moon, 6 missions to the surface of the moon, 2 astronauts each time. So a total of 12 men have walked on the moon. Let me see if I've missed. Oh, here, there's a great question about The Martian. Do you think any of the movie The Martian is accurate at all? Yes. NASA engineers and scientists love Andy Weir's The Martian, the book and the movie. Of course, there are some sensational moments like the wind being strong enough on Mars to knock Mark Watney off the ladder. That would never happen. The wind's not that strong on Mars. So that piece isn't true. But the way the habitat looked, the spacesuit ideas, the idea of pre-positioning habitats and materials on Mars and then sending the astronauts there, that's all realistic. How they got Mark Watney out of the moon and, using a little bit of the depressurized of the spacesuit, shooting and help directing him, there was no way an astronaut that would never really happen, but there's a lot of science and true mission type pieces that are very accurate. And when Andy Weir was writing the book, he wasn't famous then, and he would write a chapter and then post it online to this message board, and then we get people's feedback. And there were a lot of folks in the science community that were saying, nah, that's not possible in orbital mechanics, or physically that's not possible, that's not how it would work. And so he was getting a lot of feedback as he was writing the book chapter by chapter until it was finished. And it wasn't until quite a bit after the book was released that it became really popular and then made into a movie. But our NASA team really likes, that's probably the most accurate space movie that I've ever seen, and it has Matt Damon in it, which is good. All right. What happens if an astronaut gets sick or needs medical attention while they are in space? So we try not to have any that happen. So it starts off with quarantining astronauts and testing them for illnesses before they fly, and then keeping them separate and people wearing masks and limiting the exposure with other humans. And we've been doing that before the pandemic. That was pretty common. And so that allows us to be able to control like stomach bugs, flu, cold, those kinds of viruses, right? Strep throat, things that are commonplace that you wouldn't want to take with you to space and infect other people. Because usually when you go to the space station, you're traveling with 2 other people in a spacecraft, and then there are usually 3 other astronauts already on the space station. And so that's our first way of keeping them safe. But sometimes astronauts do get hurt. There have been colds that have been passed around and they just weren't caught ahead of time. Astronauts can bump their heads, cut their fingers, small things, have upset stomachs, headaches, just like we would, here on Earth. And there are a team of people called flight surgeons, or we call them flight doctors, that are trained, that have medical background and specific expertise in the effects of the body in a reduced gravity environment. And they have calls with their medical doctors at least once a week, and they can call down to mission control and ask for a consult with the flight doc on we call it on console, which is like on rotation at that time, and talk with them about what's going on. So they have basic medicine. Astronauts know how to perform IVs. They have a defibrillator. They know how to do CPR in a microgravity environment. So they're trained on basic first aid. But if something were really serious and someone was hurt badly, then they would put them in the spacecraft and they would come home. And so you can get home in a matter of hours from the International Space Station. That won't be the case with the moon, right? You're talking about days away. And so having astronauts that are expert in medicine and then providing them with the equipment to handle emergency situations is going to be really important too. Because if you're going to have a base where people are living on the moon for a year, you're going to have not a full-blown hospital, but you're going to have a unit that can handle broken bones and, ultrasound equipment and defibrillators and, basic types of things you would have, maybe like a military medic, the things that you carry with you for emergency situations. Those are all things that we're having to think about. All right, so I love this question. Will they have some kind of way to duplicate an Earth level gravity habitat for longer missions? So as of right now, NASA does not have any plans to create like a centrifugal force kind of spinning spacecraft. In theory, it could be done, but it would have to be huge, like way bigger than anything that we would, need. And to being able to keep it a controlled spin that doesn't get out of control is really difficult. So in theory, it could be done, but it's not something NASA is considering. Maybe the technology will get better in the future and it's something that we can consider. But for the near future, we are not planning to use something like that. We don't even have a prototype that could be put in place, in the next 20 or 30 years. But who knows what will happen afterwards? There might be something new developed that would, remedy that issue. Right now, we're just trying to get wherever we want to go faster. So liquid propulsion can get us to the moon in, 9 months, maybe 7-8 months at the quickest. But if we use nuclear rockets, which is something NASA's looking into, it could get us there in half the time, and so we're looking at new propulsion methods that can get us there faster. Let's see, let's see, make sure I didn't skip anything. Do you know how many people work for NASA? It's got to be quite a big number. Yes, so just at Johnson Space Center, where I work, we have about 12 to 13,000 people that support efforts at Johnson Space Center. Some of those people work on site, pre-COVID, of course, and then other people work off-site. We have off-site buildings with some of our contractors and different companies. So like there are Boeing and KBR Wiley and Aerojet Rocketdyne and Jacobs Engineering, just to name a few. They all have off-site offices too, but it's a pretty big number. The majority of those people are contractors. So they work for other companies, and then a smaller number would be the government civil servants. And so that's just Johnson Space Center. So you're looking at tens of thousands of employees and contractors across the United States. All right, I think I hit all of those. Did the medical question? Yeah, these are all great questions, guys. Any more, or is that all?
All right, we can give it another minute, see if anybody else has any last minute questions. That was all new information for me though, wow.
Yeah, I learn something new all the time, right? There's so much happening right now. It's really exciting. And the next 10, 15 years are going to be pretty amazing in the space industry. We have efforts that our nations are working towards, right? Like government agencies. And then we have the space tourism business that's coming up behind, the government agency space exploration type programs. And so it's a really cool time to pay attention to space exploration, especially here in the United States. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Was the Artemis program delayed at all by all this COVID stuff in the past year and a half?
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly how much it's been delayed. We'll know. You'll know how much it's delayed once we launch, because we're planning on launching, by the end of the year. But if you've paid attention to the news, Florida's been hit really hard. Kennedy Space Center has been really hit hard with COVID, having even fatalities, and so it's been really tough. And the work that they do there, they have to be on site to do. A lot of what NASA does can be done from home, and with a limited number of people in laboratories and doing things, on site. We've been able to do a lot of the work, but there's some things you just have to be there in person to do. And so Florida's been hit really hard. And so we are still working towards, getting that launch done at the end of the year, but we'll know probably better in the next 6 weeks or so, a launch date, and whether we can make a November, December, launch. If we are delayed, it's not going to be a whole lot, maybe a few weeks, a month at the most. But there are delays, but I couldn't tell you exactly like how much or how many days.
Looks like we got a couple more questions.
Okay. Have I met Jessica Meir? I have met Jessica Meir in passing. A lot of our jobs, since we do public type engagement and public affairs type work, so the astronauts are in and out of our studios and out of our offices. So I've met her in passing. I don't have a friendship with her. I have a few other astronauts that I have friendships with, but she's not one of them. But she's pretty amazing. She's your Maine astronaut. So I know she's very popular and famous there in Maine as your Maine astronaut. Oh, and this is another good one. Would I like to go to space? Yeah, I would like to go to space. I would go to the International Space Station in a heartbeat. I would train to be an astronaut, an Artemis astronaut. Would I go to Mars? No, I'm not that brave. And that I wouldn't want to be away from my family that long. I have daughters that are in middle school and elementary school, and that would be just a little too long of a mission for me.
Yeah,
a lot more risk, way more risk for a Mars mission too.
Yeah, that 9 months blew me away. 9 months just to get there.
Yeah.
And then 9 months back, and then the time you want to be there.
It's going to be pretty intense. There are certain types of people, certain individuals that are just, made for these exciting exploration type adventures. You think about Lewis and Clark and the explorers of the, of history, and it's not everybody is genetically, inclined for those kinds of adventures, but there are people that are willing and able to do it. I'm not that adventurous.
Yeah, I don't think I am either. All right. So thank you all who are still with us. I hope you all enjoyed. It will be recorded and on Facebook. So if you missed anything or you wanted to rewatch, you can always go there, facebook.com/Lewiston Library. Thank you so much, Patricia. This was amazing. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm glad. It was a little hairy at the beginning. Thanks for those of you hanging on. I had to restart and reboot my computer with mandatory Windows updates. So but thanks for being patient, and I'm glad it all worked out.
Yeah. All right. I hope everybody has a good night. Thanks again.
All right. Bye.
Bye.